Hey, I'm sorry to say, I wasn't able to fit this entire build into a single video. So we're going to see the foam, and then it's going to be split so you can see the painting in a different video. Look, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to split it up. It's not like I monetize my videos or anything. Hey, for this next build, this is just the foam part, as I just said, you will need roughly 3 hours for the foam part, a leather effect or leather belt, some sharp knives, some Ava foam, some corrugated or otherwise sheet rigid plastic, and some contact adhesive to put it all together. Hey gals, guys, and everyone else, welcome back to another one of the League of Legends shop items that I kind of just wanted to make in real life as a cosplay prop, because you know what? I don't know. Anyway, welcome. We just did the Dorans ring, and now we're on to the Dorans shield. So this is one for all of you top lane mains, or, well, actually, I know some AD carries pick it when they're not too sure about surviving the lane. Anyway, either way, if you ever wanted to make a shield or similar style prop for your next cosplay, please follow along. And one thing I want to stress for this build is that no special equipment is required to follow along. It's just a list of materials and a sharp knife. We'll get on to making props later down the line, which use fancier and fancier equipment that you might find if you're a more seasoned cosplayer. But for just getting started, for just trying to put something together when you might not be able to attack things in your bedroom with a soldering iron or a rotary tool, or have spray guns and airbrushes, I'm just going to try and take you through how to make a shield like this with as fewer complications as possible. I've made a good few shields for LARP throughout the years, and so hopefully, and these have lasted for years and years and years at events where they've been hit with sticks and blah blah blah, so they've survived, so hopefully that adds some pedigree to what I'm saying. Anyway, should we begin? As with all videos on the internet, this one has to start with a cat. This is spooky. He's new. He's still a surprise to me. But it also starts with a lie. That's enough, cat. Now, building on our experience from the foam craft in the last video, we're going to do something a little bit more complicated as we slowly ramp up the difficulty of these builds and hopefully give you a good introduction on how to build more complicated props. Here we are starting with our sheet of corrugated plastic. This is stuff I've used before to make shields. I've bought it from a hardware store, or you can just find it. Like this sheet was left over from a university art show where they were used to make the displays at the show. You can also find them as like signs and displays in shops. They often get thrown out. You can find them in building sites, all sorts of places. But just be sure to wash them down before you try and glue anything to them. Now, because we are making something that's round, we've got to figure out what size this is going to be. So we've got our meter-long ruler, putting it in the center, doing a cross, and then we're bodging a little bit because I don't have a meter-sized protractor or compass. I can't remember which one it actually is. I'll probably edit this out. So, tying it off to a scalpel blade, shoving the scalpel blade in the middle because we don't really mind if we damage this sheet of plastic since it's going to be covered in foam anyway, and because this isn't a LARP prop, it doesn't need to be particularly structurally sound. I mean, we would like it to survive more than a couple of events if you say are making your own prop, but of course it's not going to take blows or whatever depending on how badly you store it. Tying off the other end of that string to a pen, and we're just going around in a circle as best we can, and then trimming it down with a sharp knife. This stuff is quite tricky to cut. If you've got a pair of tin snips, those might do. Some very heavy duty shears maybe, but I'm using a retractable knife with brand new sharp blades. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to work with sharp blades, and also something that I am admittedly very bad at doing. You can see my hand is never the other side where the knife is going. So if I slip, I'm not going to slice a finger open. Also, if you are younger and you're trying this yourself, please be super, super careful. I don't want to be responsible for anybody playing with sharp, retractable knives or scalpels and hurting themselves. If you don't feel 100% confident with what you're doing, go ask someone to help you out, or at least just watch. So if you do hurt yourself, they can be there to help. Let's get to the foam part of this foam build. As you can see, I'm cutting around the disc we've just cut, but I'm doing so with about 2 or 3 extra centimeters worth of leeway because we want this piece of plastic to be sandwiched inside the foam. And once we've done that, we're going to do it again. We're going to use this as a template for the other piece of foam because these 2 pieces of foam are going to sandwich either side of that plastic sheet. And to make sure this foam doesn't slip as we're cutting around it, we're just going to pin it to the other bit. Just 4 pins, nice and simple. And then using, once again, replacing our blades often or sharpening them often if you've got a blade sharpener. This sort of cheap camping mat style Ava foam floor mat stuff really dulls foam super quick. It's bizarre. But we'll cut around it again until we have our 2 halves ready and waiting. And then here's the little flourish where we add the extra type of foam. As I said at the start, you need at least 2 thicknesses worth of foam for this, a thick stuff and a thin stuff. I actually end up using 3 thicknesses of foam for this because that's what I happen to have. Just using cheap fun foam or anything you can find is also good for this. This was stuff that I bought second hand at a scrap store, so I got lucky to find this. Most of this is all founder materials, but you can purchase it online. Just get like 1 or 2 millimeter thick fun foam, and that will do for this extra bit, because that purple sheet is going to be the detailing we've got on the front. Oh, that's the doorbell. Ah, someone just dropped by to tell me about this thing called Raid. Apparently, I guess I've got some insects to kill, but it gives me a perfect time to remind you that this entire build, in fact, the Dorans shield, the Dorans blade, were all done live on stream, every part of it. So if you want to see future builds like this live, go follow me on twitch.tv/armouredbrownies. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel to see more of these League of Legends builds and also my own personal cosplay builds and sculpt. I do a lot of mask sculpting, prosthetic making, foam armour, and we're starting to get into mechanical things. So hang around, and of course, drop a comment below if there is a League of Legends item that you want to see made in real life. And I'll see if we can get to it sooner rather than later. Thanks. Now, as you might have noticed, since we're planning on sandwiching the foam around the plastic core to keep its shape, what you might think is there's going to be a gap between the top layer of foam and the bottom layer of foam, which you're right. So, using the outside edge of the foam we just cut, we're going to cut another 2 or 3 centimeter thick strip around the outside, which you'll notice will have a larger circumference than before, but that's fine, because what we're just going to do, we're going to just cut a section out of that circle and we're going to glue it down. Now you'll notice we haven't actually measured anything for this prop. That's because this thing has no scale. No scale at all, so we don't really mind what size this comes out at, so long as it's all proportional to itself. And we can kind of do this all by eye. In the future, for different props, we will start scaling things, and I'll bring you through how I do all my scaling, but for the moment, we're sticking with the basics here. And now for one of my favourite little hacks for putting leather or faux leather straps on things, a cheap £1 or £2 belt. Because you can get these things from like Primark, Matalan, and also, where I get most of mine, charity shops. And we're going to be using this to create the straps that our arm goes on, as you can see me kind of mapping it out, then taking a pen and putting where I want my hand to go, the part that's holding the shield, and then where the arm will go in through, which has the adjustable part to go over whatever costume I'm wearing. And it's adjustable because if you're making props separately, you never know what you're going to be wearing, and also you might want to reuse it. And also, it's just good practice to make things adjustable so you can reuse them over time. Now, we're taking some pretty good quality scissors, and we're cutting about 20 centimeters, maybe a bit more, behind where the buckle is. You can see me mapping it out on the shield, trying to get a good feel for where it should be. And then we go over to the other end of the belt and we cut behind where all the holes are that the belt goes into. So that gives us 2 halves of a real leather strap, or at least a real enough looking leather strap. It is more than possible to make your own leather strapping for different projects. I'll probably end up doing it in a future video, but this is just a super easy shortcut. And as you can see, we're left with a section in the center which has no holes in it, which will be the grip. Now, just at the edges of those lines we marked out, we're taking our sharp knife again, and we're cutting little rectangles of the same width and depth of that belt to go through. And then we flip it over, put those parts of the belt through, and glue them down with our contact adhesive. always making sure that we're double checking that there's enough leeway for our hand to go through, plus the 10mm of foam that will be there when we sandwich it back in, and also enough leeway that our costume can go into it. Because if you're making this as an accessory for your costume, there needs to be enough space for your foam armour, your big shirt, your floofy blouse or whatever to go through there if you're in long sleeves. And of course that goes for any sort of prop that you might want to put straps like this on. It's such an easy way of doing it and cheap. A little bit of advice though, if you're planning on using this as a LARP prop, because this is totally the way you can make LARP prop, you'll want to put something extra to hold down these leather straps, because the faux leather, the pleather or the leather won't take the contact adhesive particularly well because it's not porous, nor will the plastic. If you put too much strain on it, you will just pull them out. So you can put through some pop rivets or some leather rivets to just rivet them down and have a mechanical fastening onto the shield. I've seen people use actual just bolts. As long as there's enough foam between the surface and the bolt, you won't hurt yourself or others. And as you can see, we've tried it on and it fits. So let's move on to actually assembly, now that we've coiled these pieces down. You can see that little ring that we cut before goes around to fill in the gap that would be sandwiched. I got lucky that the corrugated plastic is the same thickness as that foam, but there's a fair bit of leeway since it's all soft and pliable, and also it won't really be noticed if there's a little bulge or a little gap because we're going to be putting stuff around the edge. Now, to seat the plastic exactly where we want it, you can see I've set a ring of pins around the edge. So we're able to use that to guide the plastic back in directly onto the glue, because of course with a surface area this large, using the contact adhesive, once you put it on, you're not going to get the opportunity to move it around or pull it apart particularly easily. So we're being very careful and double checking our work to make sure it is as centered as it can possibly be. And centered might not be the right word, we just want it to be in the same place that it was before, so it matches up with the ring that we're about to put around to fill the sandwich gap as the filling. Is the contact adhesive mayonnaise in this analogy? Ah. Now, we're going around the edge, we're just doing this all again. If you're unfamiliar with contact adhesive, you want it to be a nice thin layer laid on, then keep the two parts apart for a little bit, and then once they have had a chance for the solvents to evaporate, oh yeah, there's loads of solvents in this, make sure you're in a well ventilated area, and then you push them together. One of the big troubles we have with foam like this is that when we're putting face to face, unless we're using the flat surfaces, because most of these Ava foam floor mats have a flat surface and a textured surface, the textured surface will not go together particularly well. So that's one of the reasons why it's super important to make sure you let the flash off a bit and get tacky before you put them together, so they will stick straight away. With things that will hold themselves together with just friction or capillary action or whatever, you can get away with putting two bits of wet contact adhesive together because the solvents will still escape over time and it will glue itself together over time, but you don't have that luxury with things that don't hold themselves together. And then there's the slightly more complicated bit, and it's literally just doing this by eye, cutting out holes for the straps to go through. You might have thought I forgot about this bit, but no. And we're doing it by eye, we're doing this by eye, and then any of the gaps left behind where the leather bits are coming in, we just fill with our offcuts of foam, because those foam shapes are going to be the exact right size to go through it. You might think it would be easier to put the foam on first and then cut through to put the straps on, but I've always found it easier to attach the straps directly to the core before putting them through, rather than gluing stuff on, then having to cut through foam and align things with the foam already there. Your mileage may vary, however, but this is just my experience. And then we do our best to glue that down without getting the straps covered in glue, but we also don't mind if the straps get some glue on them because we can just peel it off, because as I've said, this pleather is not porous, so the glue doesn't sink into it, so you can just peel it off. And there is our foam blank, our base to make the shield off. Of course, as I say, it's a blank. You can turn it into anything you want, even a shield. But from here, we're going to start adding the details. Now, usually, and what you'll see in most tutorials, people will use rotary tools, soldering irons, and all sorts of things to get different details embossed on the surface of the foam to give it texture, to give it something to paint afterwards. But in line with keeping this as super simple as I can, we're not going to be using any tool beyond a sharp knife. Most notably, probably here, a scalpel, but any sharp knife that will cut foam smoothly and cleanly will work just fine, because now we're going to be putting the wooden detail on the front, and we're using this nice and thin fun foam. So the first thing we do is, well, check our references, and then we're going to draw on the details that we're going to be putting on to give us lines to follow. Because our reference image isn't particularly detailed, we get to take a bit of creative liberty here, but the art style of our reference image gives us a design to follow. So long as it's evoking the kind of cartoonish ideal of wood, it kind of works. For this wood effect, we're doing the different planks going down, drawing some knots, having it being a little bit wiggly, and then cutting along those lines to add a little bit of separation between the different quote-unquote planks of wood that we're then going to glue on the front of the foam. We're also cutting out the little eyelets and cutting in little veins and little burrs along the surface of the wood to give it a nice organic texture. This is all stuff that, yeah, you could do by burning the pattern into the foam, but you know, if you don't have access to additional tools, I hopefully will show you that you can do this easily enough without any of that. Now, because this stuff is so thin, and it'll be really awkward to try and butter the back of it with the glue, I'm actually putting down a slightly extra thick layer of the glue, and then we're putting this foam directly onto that glue. Because as I said earlier, if the two surfaces can't hold themselves together, they won't glue unless they're tacky enough, because it's contact adhesive, it needs that contact. But because this stuff is so thin, the surface tension of the contact adhesive will actually hold it down. And of course, we actually have the benefit of being able to put it face down with some weight behind it if we have to, which will hold everything to it. Any other bits that just pull up, any small bits, you can just use some spray-on contact adhesive, because that stuff, the solvent in that flashes off basically straight away, and you get to add that in. Now, to add a more subtle wood grain effect to this beyond what we've just cut in, I'm using the back side of a sharp knife. We don't want the actual sharp bit, we want the blunt part, but we also want the metal bit, so it does leave an impression on the wood. And we just go through it, we're just following the lines, following the natural curves. You can look at reference images for this or see how other people have drawn wood. I wouldn't look too closely at real wood or real wood planks, because this is a cartoonish art style, and cartoonish art styles don't always match their realistic style. And then once we've done that and we're leaving it to all set, you can see I've piled in everything I have in the studio on top of it to help it all set as one cohesive part. So we've got a lot of weight on there. As I say, this whole thing took about 5 hours, but that doesn't include drying time, which is one of those annoying things that you can't really get around. We've got some more details to put in now. We've got our wooden base, but this shield has banding, the metal stuff around the edges. And to do that, we're going to use one of my favourite ever materials for making, and it's this grease-proof paper. It's basically pattern paper. It's so good because it's semi-transparent, you can draw on it, you can cut it off, and it comes in huge long like reams that you can just cut down, and it's just better than using newspaper or other types of paper. The only issue with it is because it is grease-proof and like proof against ink, is that when you draw on it, sometimes that will come off on your fingers, but it will still leave a bit of a mark for you to use. So we're just going to trace the edge of this, and then figure out the angles and the degrees that we want these the banding parts on the outside to be. As much as this isn't so much planning, this kind of isn't doing it by eye, but it's also not calculating or planning stuff out thoroughly like you would on a properly scaled prop. as you'll be able to see with the finished article, it doesn't matter. It comes out looking good anyway. So we cut that template out and transfer it onto our slightly thicker foam than the wood effect, but thinner than the bulk of the piece. And then we're going to pin that down and we're going to cut around it with a sharp knife. And every time we've cut a shape of it out, we move that shape over a bit, cut around that again, still using those pins to hold it down. And then once we have as many as we need, for this one we need 8 or 9 to go all the way around the edge, we have our stack of banding bits that we're going to put around the edge. Now that we have those, we can lay them out around the edge to make sure they fit and all the angles where the different parts meet up match. And as someone who fell foul of angles in the last video, I'm super careful about this now. Well, obviously not that careful because you don't see me using a compass here, but we trim it down, sharp knife, again, you know the deal, and then fit them around the edge again to just get them to try and match up. Bearing in mind, we're not worrying about the flash, about the extra bits of foam hanging over the edge, because we'll be trimming those when we put a fascia around the edge. So we're not too worried about the purple foam hanging out or the actual, where the different layers of the sandwiched foam have come apart a little bit, because it is two textured faces pressing against each other. We're not that worried about it. But here you can see I'm just adjusting all the individual little edges where they meet so they all join up quite nicely, and then it's all just gluing again. You've seen me glue plenty of things now, and hopefully at this point you've glued a few things yourself and understand how the glue functions. And as we are going, we are trimming off any bits that look uneven, because we can do that before it's properly set, of course, again with our sharp knife, with our little scalpel. Now there's only a couple of extra little details to go now. We've got all the little rivets. And once again, because it's quite a cartoonish object, we don't really need to make sure they are all mechanically sound and look perfect. So what I'm just going to do is cut lots and lots of little squares and then cut the very tips of the edges off, like this, to make little hexagons, octagons, to make little bolt-like objects that we then dab a little bit of contact adhesive onto the back and then plonk them down on the foam. I don't really worry about doing the whole contact adhesive thing with these because they hold themselves on perfectly fine without it. And I just go around and do that for all of those. And as you can see by this kind of pointless close-up, there are all the bolts done, but we've still got all that flashing around the outside of the excess foam that I don't want you to have worried about as you've gone along, because you don't want it to be all that precise, because we can now cut it down so it's all level. As long as we're cutting with the shortest piece of foam, so they all create a flat surface with the knife, we can then just go around the outside and clean everything up. That's something you can do with a lot of different props. If you think about the order in which you put them together, you can either then sand them back, trim them down or whatever, so it will all be uniform, but without having to worry too much about getting it perfect the first time. You can see now where the different layers haven't quite adhered properly. It still shows that it's definitely foam, and we kind of want to hide that. Using our ruler, we're checking how deep it is, and then we're cutting using a set square to follow the depth, a long strip of foam. In fact, we cut a couple of strips of foam, and then we're going to cut that into segments the same length as the outside circumference of the banding, and then just one after another, cut them down, glue them to the outside of the whole thing, and then trim it down afterwards, glue it to the outside of the whole thing to cover that up. And I tend to call this cladding because it means you can be less neat with the rest of the foam, because if you're just going to clad it or skin it, it takes a big weight off your shoulders and makes things a lot easier. And half of that just comes down to planning or experience or ordering things in the right way. One of the things I'm doing, putting glue down on two surfaces, then putting them to one side, putting glue down on the next two surfaces, putting them down, and then going back to the one I did before, because that gives enough time for the solvents to flash off, and then we can adhere them together. And one of the bonuses with something like this is I can roll it around to make sure everything adheres and is flat and like pressed in just as we're going. And with all that together, with a little bit of trimming for any of the excess. That is the base foam work done. Except for one little extra bit, because I'm a glutton for punishment. We want to put some battle damage on this, make it look used, make it look weathered, tie into the computer game cartoony aesthetic of the whole thing. We use some sharp knives or scissors or something. Just take lots of little nicks, lots of little crunchy bits out of it. This is half to make it look a bit more organic, a bit more like a used object, and it's also a lot to make it, to give us something more to paint and to give it more details, because the more little details, more little bits of battle damage you put in, the less obvious any uneven parts of the final build will be. Because the excess visual noise on the prop will disguise a lot of the uneven parts or where bits don't join properly. We don't want to go over the top with this, however, because if you do it too much, the object will just look like a complete mess. But anyway, that is the complete foam work done for this. And here you go, here is for the Dorans blade that's going to come after this shield, as I wave them about because I'm just super happy with how they've come out. As I said earlier in the video, I would have loved to have kept both halves of this video together, but it's just basically an hour-long monolith of a video to edit down and voice over. So please join me next time when we talk about the painting, weathering and finishing of this prop, and we get something that looks a little bit like this. Thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff, and I'll see you next time. Bye!